A respected sheriff, a vulnerable teenager, and a shocking crime that shattered trust and lives. This is a story of power, betrayal, and a cover-up that turned deadly. The quiet town of Oakwood, where law enforcement is meant to be a shield, instead became the backdrop for a story no one ever expected. A sheriff who was thought to be a symbol of safety and trust betrayed that sacred role in the most horrific way. A teenager, young, hopeful, and unaware of the dark forces at play, became the target of a predator. What followed was a crime that would change everything, shaking the foundation of the community and leaving a family torn apart. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about the abuse of authority, the systemic failures that allowed it to happen, and the devastating ripple effects on an entire community. What does it say about a society when the very system designed to protect its citizens instead becomes complicit in their destruction? How many warning signs were ignored, and how many lives were altered by the failure to act? In a small town where everyone thought they were safe, how could something so horrifying slip through the cracks? Stay with us as we explore the life of the victim, the crime that shocked the nation, the investigation that unraveled a web of lies, and the trial that sought justice for a life tragically cut short. Hit the subscribers button if you have not as we continue. Can justice ever truly be served when so much has been buried? How far will one man go to keep a secret, and what will it take to bring the truth to light? As we peel back the layers of this story, one question remains. Will the truth be enough to right the wrongs done, or is justice just a distant hope for a family forever changed? Keisha Taylor was just 17 years old, a high school junior with big dreams of becoming a social worker to help others in her community. She loved writing poetry and had a talent for making those around her feel heard and valued. She had an infectious energy, a laugh that could light up a room, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of people. Her passion was to make a difference, to be the voice for those who felt invisible. In her small town, she was known for standing up for what was right and being the friend who would always listen, always understand. Everyone around her could see she was destined for greatness, yet her bright future would be taken too soon. She was the glue of our family, her aunt recalled, her voice breaking as she wiped away tears. Her smile could brighten the darkest days. Keisha was always the first to offer help, to offer love, to make sure no one felt alone. Her best friend remembered her as wise beyond her years, someone who would never back down from standing up for what was right, even if it meant putting herself in the line of fire. Keisha had a heart that saw the potential in others, in a future that seemed limitless. But all of that came to an end one fateful night. Her mother, when asked about the girl she raised, said simply, "She was my everything. I couldn't imagine life without her, and now I don't know how to breathe without her." Her family and friends are left with the haunting question, how could the life of a young girl, full of promise and dreams, be cut short in such a senseless way? Keisha first met Sheriff James Porter at a local community event aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and young people. It was meant to be a day of connection, of understanding. Keisha, ever eager to make a positive impact, was part of a group of teens who attended to talk about their concerns, their lives, and what they wanted for the future. She admired Sheriff Porter, or so she thought. She saw him as a man of authority, someone who worked hard for the community and cared about its future. The sheriff, with his years of service, was a familiar face, someone the community trusted. At first, he appeared kind, even paternal, an authority figure with a reputation for helping the people he served. But what Keisha couldn't have known was that the man who was supposed to protect her was the one who would betray her trust in the most horrific way. What started as an innocent interaction would soon lead to something much darker, something no one could have predicted. How could someone with so much potential, so much hope for the future, find herself in the clutches of someone she trusted? What happens when those in power take advantage of their position? How could one person's evil choices destroy a young life and shake an entire community? Keisha thought she was safe. How did everything go so terribly wrong? Keisha Taylor's life, once filled with promise and dreams, began to take an unexpected turn after she crossed paths with Sheriff James Porter. What started as a seemingly innocent mentorship turned into something far more complicated and dangerous. At first, Keisha admired Porter. He was a figure of authority, someone who spoke about community, trust, and helping others. But what Keisha didn't know was that this mentorship had begun to cross boundaries. It was supposed to be a safe space, a relationship grounded in guidance and support. But Sheriff Porter began to offer more than just advice. His interest in Keisha soon took on a more personal tone, one that she would later come to regret. Over time, the nature of their interactions shifted. What began with harmless conversations soon turned into late-night phone calls, secret meetings under the pretense of mentorship, and helping her navigate life. Keisha, like many young girls, never thought that someone in a position of power could be capable of manipulating their trust in such a way. But it didn't take long for Keisha to realize she was in over her head. When Keisha discovered she was pregnant, the weight of her situation seemed unbearable. She confided in her best friend, someone she trusted deeply, about her fears of what Sheriff Porter might do if the truth came out. "What if he hurts me? What if he makes it go away?" Keisha whispered, her voice shaking. She was terrified, terrified of the man she once trusted, terrified of the consequences of their secret being exposed. Her friend tried to reassure her, but Keisha's fears were not unfounded. Porter, a man of authority and influence, had the power to make sure no one would ever believe her if she came forward. She felt trapped, isolated, with nowhere to turn. Her dreams of becoming a social worker and helping others seemed so far away now, buried under the weight of a secret she couldn't carry alone. Keisha became more distant in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, haunted by the knowledge that her life was taking an irreversible path. The fear of betrayal and the consequences of her pregnancy kept Keisha on edge. But in the days before she disappeared, there was no sign that things were about to take such a dark turn. Keisha showed up to work at her part-time job at a local diner, a routine she had kept for months to help her save for college. She smiled, served customers, and joked with her coworkers as though everything was normal. But deep down, she was anything but normal. She was living in constant fear, fear that her life was about to be destroyed by the very person who was supposed to protect her. On a cold January night, just days after Keisha's confession to her friend, something went horribly wrong. Keisha finished her shift at the diner around 10 p.m. She clocked out and made her way out into the icy night, expecting to catch the bus home as usual. But this time she never made it. Her family grew frantic when she didn't return home that night. Her mother, pacing the floor, called her phone again and again. No answer. She called her friends, hoping to find out where she was, but no one had seen her. The anxiety in the house grew by the hour, and soon it was clear. Keisha was missing. Days passed with no word from Keisha. Her family's worst fears began to set in. They contacted the local authorities, and soon an investigation was launched. The town, once filled with the familiar rhythms of everyday life, was now shrouded in fear. Where was Keisha? What had happened to her? The sheriff's department, led by none other than James Porter, began their search. But the questions grew louder. Why wasn't there more urgency in the search? Why was there so little cooperation from the department? It wasn't until a jogger discovered Keisha's lifeless body in a secluded field just outside town that the investigation took a sharp turn. The field was tucked away from the main roads, hidden from view by thick trees and overgrown grass. The body was found nearly 4 days after Keisha had gone missing, and the scene was a chilling sight. Keisha's clothes were torn, her body bruised and battered. The cold, hard earth beneath her seemed to be the only thing that could offer any kind of relief from the brutality she had suffered. The coroner's report painted a devastating picture of her final moments. Keisha had been violently assaulted before her death. She had fought back, but her attacker overpowered her, leaving signs of struggle all over her body. Her face, once full of life, was now a haunting image of pain and terror. The brutal nature of her murder suggested that whoever had taken her life wanted to send a message that would be felt by her family, her friends, and the entire community for years to come. As the investigation unfolded, the initial assumption was that Keisha's murder was the result of a random act of violence. But as detectives began to sift through the evidence, they uncovered something far more chilling, something that would link Keisha's death directly to Sheriff James Porter. detectives discovered Keisha's phone, partially buried near the crime scene. It was a small detail at first, but it became the breakthrough they desperately needed. When they examined the phone, it revealed a chilling timeline of Keisha's final days. The text messages, casual at first, slowly grew darker as Keisha began to distance herself from Sheriff Porter. There were threats in the messages, warnings, and demands from Porter after Keisha refused to terminate the pregnancy. He became increasingly aggressive, and the language in their texts reflected his growing desperation. In one message, Keisha wrote, "I can't do this anymore. I need to tell someone." In the reply, Porter's words were sharp, threatening. "If you say anything, I'll make sure no one believes you. You won't even have the chance to ruin my career. I'll make sure of that." The more they dug, the clearer it became that Keisha's pregnancy was the key to understanding the horror of her fate. Sheriff Porter had manipulated and coerced her into silence, even resorting to threats when he realized that Keisha might expose him. The discovery of these texts was the first step in unraveling the twisted relationship between Keisha and the man who had sworn to serve and protect her. But it wasn't just the phone that raised suspicions. The security footage from the gas station near the crime scene was another vital piece of evidence. The video showed Sheriff Porter's car parked near the isolated area where Keisha's body was later discovered. The timestamp matched the time frame when Keisha went missing. This discovery was the nail in the coffin for those who had begun to question Porter's involvement. Detectives now had a clear connection between the sheriff and the crime, and the weight of the evidence was undeniable. They were no longer simply investigating a murder. They were uncovering a carefully constructed lie, a dark secret held by someone who had abused their power to commit a heinous crime. For Keisha's family, the investigation was not just about seeking justice for their daughter. It was about surviving the nightmare that had become their reality. The waiting was unbearable. Every day that passed without answers felt like an eternity. Keisha's mother, who had never imagined she would one day be preparing for her daughter's funeral, often found herself on her knees praying for a miracle. "I kept praying for her to come home, but deep down I knew something terrible had happened," Keisha's mother would later recall, her voice trembling. "I just couldn't believe it was real. I didn't want to believe it." Her aunt, too, was consumed by grief, recalling the last time she saw Keisha. "She had this energy about her. She was always so full of life. I remember telling her, 'You're going to do great things, Keisha. I just know it.'" But now all her hopes for Keisha's future were shattered, replaced with a relentless ache of loss. Friends and family who had known Keisha's kindness and her dreams for a better future were left with nothing but questions. Why would a man entrusted with power and authority betray that trust in such a violent way? How could someone so revered in the community be responsible for taking an innocent life? The emotional toll on Keisha's loved ones was immeasurable. The images of her smiling face, her hopes and dreams, were now overshadowed by the brutal reality of what had happened. And the more they learned about Sheriff Porter's involvement, the more devastating it became. They weren't just mourning the loss of Keisha, they were grappling with the truth that the very person they thought was there to protect them was the one who had taken her away. For the community, too, the impact was profound. How could they trust their local law enforcement after this? The betrayal felt deeply personal. It wasn't just a stranger who had committed the crime. It was someone who had held a position of power, someone they had trusted to keep them safe. And now the damage was done. The loss of Keisha was a blow that would take years to heal, if it ever did. And with each new discovery in the investigation, the pain for her family and friends only deepened. How could the sheriff, someone so close to the community, hide such dark secrets for so long? How could he have done this to a girl who only wanted to make a difference in the world? These were the questions that would linger in the minds of everyone who knew Keisha, and the truth behind her murder would only deepen the wound left in its wake. Sheriff James Porter was the kind of man you could trust, at least on the surface. A 45-year-old sheriff with nearly 2 decades of service, his record was spotless. He was respected by many in the town, admired for his dedication to law enforcement and his community-oriented approach. He often spoke at local events, mentoring young people and presenting himself as a pillar of authority and morality. Many saw Porter as a dependable figure, someone whose word was as good as gold. How could anyone suspect someone with such a reputation of being capable of something so horrific? Porter's reputation in the community was one of reliability, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to keeping the peace. His friendly smile and approachable demeanor made him a figure that many would turn to in times of crisis. In public, he was everything that a small-town sheriff should be, a trusted protector, a role model. But as the investigation into Keisha's murder progressed, authorities began to uncover a darker side to the sheriff. How could someone like him, trusted by so many, hide his true nature for so long? Behind closed doors, Porter's charm turned into something much more manipulative. Those who had crossed paths with him, especially women, spoke of a more sinister side, one that used his position of power to manipulate and control. But this side of him had been cleverly hidden, covered by the fabric of respectability and the badge he wore so proudly. Was it his position that shielded him from suspicion all these years? As the investigation unraveled, it became clear that Sheriff Porter's actions weren't a result of a single, impulsive moment, but rather the culmination of years of unchecked behavior. Experts delved into his psychological state and uncovered disturbing patterns. The need to maintain his reputation, to preserve his control over others, and his deep fear of consequences seemed to have pushed him into a corner. Faced with the reality of Keisha's pregnancy and her refusal to terminate it, Porter could not allow his carefully constructed life to be threatened. What drove him to silence Keisha? Was it the fear of losing everything he'd built, the respect, the career, the status? Or was it something deeper, something more insidious that caused him to act without mercy? Porter's need for control was at the heart of his actions. He believed that no one, especially a young girl, could hold power over him. His ego could not accept that Keisha, someone he had taken under his wing, could expose his dark side. Was this crime driven by a sense of entitlement, by the belief that he could get away with anything because of who he was? The evidence revealed a deeply disturbed individual, one who was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect his image. Experts speculated that Porter's need to dominate and control was a symptom of deeper psychological issues, perhaps stemming from childhood trauma or a lifetime of reinforcing his authority without ever having to face the consequences of his actions. But what if the real monster inside him had been there all along, hidden behind the badge? As investigators dug deeper into Porter's past, they began uncovering troubling patterns of behavior that had been ignored, overlooked, or dismissed by those around him. Several former colleagues and acquaintances spoke of incidents where Porter had crossed lines with young women. These weren't isolated occurrences, but rather a series of manipulative and inappropriate interactions. Yet his position as sheriff had always afforded him a shield from any real consequences. At least that was until Keisha. Investigators learned that there had been rumors for years, whispers that Sheriff Porter had used his power to manipulate and control vulnerable young women. Yet despite the murmurs and suspicions, there had never been enough concrete evidence to hold him accountable. His reputation as a respected figure in law enforcement had allowed him to avoid scrutiny until now. How many others had been silenced by the same fear Keisha faced? How many more lives had been touched by his abuse of power before Keisha's tragic death finally exposed him? The sheriff's office, once a place of trust, became a symbol of betrayal. Porter had woven a web of lies and deceit, one that allowed him to continue his abuse without fear of reprisal. He had believed that his badge would protect him, that the people who respected him would never question his actions, but his own arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, ultimately became his downfall. As Porter's secrets came to light, the town was forced to confront a painful truth. The man they had entrusted to keep them safe was the very one who had betrayed them. How could they have been so blind? How could they not have seen the warning signs? Porter's arrest shattered the illusion of safety that many had felt living in a small town. It raised questions about the real power dynamics at play, not just in this community, but across the country. If a man with so much power and influence could be capable of such a crime, what does that say about the system that allowed him to go unchecked for so long? In the end, Sheriff James Porter was not just the man who took Keisha's life. He was the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in a system that allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. And now the true cost of his actions would be felt by an entire community. forever scarred by the loss of Keisha and the man they once thought they could trust. What price do we pay when those we trust most betray us? The trial of Sheriff James Porter captivated the nation. Inside the courtroom, emotions ran high as Keisha's family and friends waited for justice. Keisha's best friend, Maria, took the stand, her voice shaking as she recounted the last conversation she had with Keisha. Maria spoke of the fear in Keisha's voice when she confided about her pregnancy and her growing sense of dread toward Porter. She said she didn't know what he would do to her if anyone found out, Maria recalled, her words chilling in their simplicity. The weight of that statement seemed to hang in the air, leaving the courtroom silent. Forensic experts were also brought in to explain the harrowing details of Keisha's death. They provided a thorough analysis of the evidence found at the crime scene, including DNA samples and blood spatter patterns that pointed directly to Porter. How could he have thought he could get away with something so brutal? The brutality of Keisha's final moments was too much for many to bear, but it was the journal entries that truly cut to the heart of the case. Keisha had kept a diary in which she poured out her deepest thoughts and fears. The entries from her final days told a story of a young girl desperate for help, conflicted by the terror she felt, and the unrelenting pressure Porter had placed on her. In one entry she wrote, "I'm scared, but I don't know what to do. I don't think anyone would believe me if I told them what's happening. I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret." As the jury listened to these heart-wrenching words, they knew that they were not just deciding a case. They were determining whether the life of a young woman, cut tragically short, would finally be honored with justice. Could Keisha have been saved? How many others might have been silenced before her if she hadn't found the courage to speak out? These were the questions that lingered in the minds of many as the trial unfolded. The trial of Sheriff Porter was not just a legal battle, it was a battle for the soul of the town itself. The revelation of Porter's abuse of power sent shockwaves through the community. People who had once respected him now found themselves questioning everything they knew about their local government and law enforcement. The crime ignited protests, with people demanding accountability for those in power who enabled such abuses to go unchecked for so long. Keisha's death became more than just a tragic story. It became a rallying cry for justice and reform. Could this crime have been prevented if the system had been more accountable? The calls for change echoed through the streets, and for many the trial marked a turning point. The community, once so trusting of their local sheriff, now faced the harsh reality that their faith in authority had been misplaced. Keisha's story highlighted the dangers of unchecked power and the vulnerability of those who were most at risk: young women, minorities, and those without a voice. How many other towns are sitting in silence, too afraid to question the authority of those who are meant to protect them? As the trial wore on, more and more people began to speak out about their own experiences with law enforcement. Some shared stories of inappropriate conduct, others of fear and intimidation. The tragic death of Keisha Taylor forced a community to confront the uncomfortable truths about the abuse of power within their own ranks. Keisha's death was a painful reminder of the need for reform, for greater transparency, and for a system that held its officials accountable, not just in this case, but across the country. Had Keisha's murder opened the door to broader systemic change, or was it a solitary tragedy that would fade into history? The jury deliberated for days before reaching a verdict. When the decision was finally read aloud in the courtroom, there was a collective exhale. First-degree murder. James Porter, the man who had once been a pillar of the community, was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Keisha's family, the verdict brought some measure of closure, but it could never undo the pain of their loss. Her mother, tearfully watching as the man who had taken her daughter's life was led away in handcuffs, said, "It's not enough. I'll never get to see her walk across a stage or hold her children." He took that from me. The impact of the sentencing was far-reaching, leaving a community fractured and broken. While some felt a sense of relief that justice had been served, others were left with the haunting question, what could have been done to prevent this from happening in the first place? Keisha's story, tragic as it was, brought to light the systemic flaws that had allowed a man in power to go unchecked for so long. How many others were left in the shadows, their voices silenced, their stories ignored? In the aftermath of Porter's sentencing, There were calls for further reforms within law enforcement agencies. Advocates pushed for increased oversight and accountability, while the public demanded better protections for vulnerable individuals who may find themselves at the mercy of those in power. Will Keisha's legacy lead to meaningful change, or will it be forgotten once the dust settles? While Keisha's family began the long process of healing, the community's path forward seemed uncertain. The scars left by Porter's betrayal would never fully fade, but the hope for justice and reform remained. Will they ever feel safe again? And will the lessons learned from this tragic event lead to a brighter future? Or will history repeat itself? Keisha Taylor's life was tragically cut short, but her story will not be forgotten. Her courage in the face of fear and her unwavering desire for a better life for others have inspired a movement for change. What will we do to ensure that no one else falls victim to the abuse of power? This case serves as a chilling reminder of the power dynamics that can exist between those who are meant to protect us and those who are vulnerable. Keisha Taylor's life was cut short by the very person who was sworn to uphold the law, and it exposes the devastating consequences when power goes unchecked. Her tragic death leaves us grappling with the harsh reality that no one is truly safe when those in authority exploit their position for their own gain. Keisha's life may have been stolen from us far too soon, but her legacy will not fade. It serves as a call to action, urging us to take a hard look at the systems in place and demand change. Keisha's story will be remembered, not just for the horror of what happened to her, but for the courage she showed in the face of fear, her willingness to speak out when everything around her told her to stay silent. How many others are out there, silenced by fear, and waiting for someone to speak for them? Her death is not just a tragedy, but a stark lesson in the importance of accountability, transparency, and the need to protect the vulnerable from those who hold power over them. Can we allow Keisha's death to be in vain, or will we use her story to fuel a movement for change? If Keisha's story has impacted you, there are ways to make a difference. Consider supporting organizations that advocate for victims of abuse, those working tirelessly to reform law enforcement and hold abusers accountable. By supporting these initiatives, you contribute to a larger movement dedicated to making our communities safer and ensuring that tragedies like this don't happen again. We must honor Keisha's memory by fighting for a future where no one has to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect them. Together, we can create a world where justice is not just an ideal, but a reality for everyone, no matter their background or the power someone may hold over them. What kind of world do you want to leave behind? Next, we'll uncover another dark tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. A story of betrayal, greed, crime, and a shocking twist you won't see coming. Stay tuned and don't miss it.